Marcus Chun adjusted his prosthetic leg for the 100th time that morning, the metal and carbon fiber clicking softly against the worn wooden bench. The VA hospital's waiting room buzzed with quiet conversations and the occasional cough, but he barely noticed. His mind wandered to places he'd rather forget. The red dust of Kepler 442b, the screams of his unit, the moment the plasma cannon had torn through his squad and taken his leg. At 24, Marcus felt ancient. 3 years of interstellar warfare against the Zephyrian Empire had aged him beyond his years. The doctor said his phantom pain would fade, but the memories never would. He stared at the appointment slip in his weathered hands. Psychological evaluation, 2:30 p.m. Another bureaucratic hurdle to jump through for his disability benefits. The automatic doors whooshed open, and Marcus glanced up expecting another veteran or medical staff. Instead, four small figures stumbled through the entrance, their movements awkward and uncertain. At first glance, they looked like children, maybe 8 or 9 years old, but something was off. Their skin held an odd iridescent quality, shifting between deep blue and silver in the fluorescent lighting. Most striking were their eyes, large, golden, and filled with an intelligence that seemed far too old for their apparent age. The receptionist didn't even look up from her screen as the 4 children approached Marcus's bench. Other waiting patients continued reading magazines or staring at their phones, completely oblivious to the newcomers. Marcus blinked hard, wondering if his medication was causing hallucinations. "Excuse me," the tallest of the 4 said, her voice carrying a strange harmonic quality that seemed to resonate in Marcus's bones. "Are you Marcus Chun, formerly Sergeant Chun of the 47th Orbital Marines?" Marcus's hand instinctively moved toward his hip where his sidearm used to rest. Old habits. Who's asking? The 4 children exchanged glances that held entire conversations. The tallest stepped forward again, her golden eyes reflecting something that might have been shame. "My name is Zara. These are my clutchmates, Finn, Kale, and Lyra." She gestured to each in turn. A boy with slightly greenish skin, another with silver-tinted hair, and a girl whose eyes seemed to hold starlight. "Clutchmates." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Siblings," Zara corrected quickly. We were..." She struggled with the words, her childlike appearance at odds with the weight in her voice. "We need to speak with you about the Battle of Crimson Ridge." The blood drained from Marcus's face. Crimson Ridge, the engagement that had cost him his leg and most of his unit. The place where they'd faced creatures that defied explanation, beings that fought with impossible coordination and seemed to anticipate every human tactic. The official reports called them advanced Zephyrian bioweapons, but Marcus and his surviving squad mates knew better. They'd seen intelligence in those golden eyes, heard something almost like speech in their strange vocalizations. "I don't know what kind of sick joke this is," Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. "But you need to leave. Now, please," Finn spoke up, his young voice cracking with emotion. "We know you have no reason to trust us. We know what we did was wrong, but we need to explain." The waiting room began to feel surreal. Other patients continued their quiet activities. Nurses moved about their duties, and the receptionist typed away at her computer. It was as if these 4 children existed in a bubble separate from the rest of the world. Lyra, the smallest of the group, stepped forward. Her eyes were filled with tears that caught the light like liquid diamonds. "We remember you, Sergeant Chun. You were the one who didn't fire when you saw us hesitate. You were the one who tried to call for a ceasefire when you realized when you saw we weren't just weapons." Marcus's breath caught. He did remember. In the chaos of the battle, when the strange creatures had suddenly stopped their assault, he'd seen something in their alien faces that looked remarkably like confusion. Fear. When one of the smaller ones had stumbled and fallen, making sounds that were unmistakably distress cries, Marcus had lowered his weapon and tried to signal his unit to stand down. That moment of hesitation had saved his life when the orbital bombardment began. The same hesitation that had gotten Private Johnson killed when he'd follow Marcus's lead instead of taking cover. "You're them," Marcus whispered, the pieces falling into place. The bioweapons. But we're not weapons, Kale said, his silver hair catching the light. We never were. We are Draknari, what your kind might call dragons, though we are young and cannot yet take our full forms. We were conscripted, forced to fight against our will. The Zephyrians captured our clutch when we were hatchlings, Zara explained, her voice heavy with memories no child should carry. They used neural control implants to force us into battle. We had no choice but to fight, even though we could sense the goodness in many of the human soldiers. We could feel your emotions, your fear, your love for your squad mates. Marcus stared at them, his mind reeling. But the Battle of Crimson Ridge was 3 years ago. You look like children. We age differently, Lyra said softly. What you see now is our natural form. The creatures you fought were us, but enhanced, made larger and more aggressive by the Zephyrian technology. The waiting room clock ticked loudly in the sudden silence. Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his worldview. Everything he thought he knew about the war, about his enemies, about his own experiences was being rewritten by 4 children who claimed to be alien dragons. "Why are you here?" he finally asked. "Why now?" "Because the war is over," Finn said simply. "The Zephyrian Empire has fallen. We are free, and we came to find every human soldier we encountered to offer what your people call an apology." "An apology?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "An apology for what? For doing what you were forced to do? For surviving? I'm the one who should be apologizing. I hesitated, and my hesitation got Johnson killed. I failed my unit." The 4 children looked at each other again, and Marcus caught a glimpse of something, a form of communication beyond words, as if they shared thoughts through their strange golden eyes. "You did not fail," Zara said firmly. "Your compassion, your recognition of our true nature in that moment, it reached us even through the neural control. You reminded us that we were more than weapons. That moment of connection helped us resist the programming long enough to—" She trailed off, glancing at her clutch mates uncertainly. "Long enough to what?" Marcus pressed. "To save you when the bombardment began," Kale finished quietly. "The energy shield that protected you from the worst of the plasma strikes, that was us. We broke our programming for just long enough to shield the humans who had shown us kindness." Marcus felt the world tilt. The plasma strike that had taken his leg should have killed him instantly. He'd always wondered how he'd survived when others so much closer to cover had died. The military medical team had called it a miracle, an impossible angle of deflection that had saved his life. "You?" he started, then stopped, overwhelmed. "We saved who we could," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we cannot save them all. And for those we could not protect, for the pain we caused even under duress, we carry the weight of sorrow." A nurse called a name across the waiting room, and Marcus glanced up to see an elderly veteran rising slowly from his chair. The normal world continued around them, oblivious to this impossible conversation. "This is why we came," Zara explained. "To find every human soldier whose life we touched, to offer our apologies and our gratitude. You showed us that even in war, there could be recognition between enemies. You reminded us that we had souls worth saving." Marcus looked at these 4 beings, children who were not children, enemies who had never truly been enemies, aliens whose eyes held more humanity than many humans he'd known. His phantom pain flared, but alongside it came something he hadn't felt in 3 years, a sense that maybe, just maybe, his actions in that hellish battle had meant something after all. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now," Zara said, "if you will allow us, we would like to tell you our story. The real story of the war, and how a young sergeant's moment of compassion echoed across the galaxy and helped bring down an empire." Marcus glanced at his appointment slip, then at the 4 unlikely visitors who had just turned his world upside down. The psychological evaluation could wait. For the first time in 3 years, he had something more important to do than relive his trauma. He had a chance to understand it. Marcus missed his appointment that day. He walked with the 4 Draknari children to a small park across from the VA hospital, where they settled on a bench beneath an old oak tree. Passers-by occasionally glance their way, but seem to see only a young man talking with four ordinary children, perhaps a big brother or babysitter. Your people cannot perceive our true nature unless we allow it, Zara explained, noticing his puzzled looks at the disinterested pedestrians. It is a survival mechanism developed over millions of years. Humans see us as we wish to be seen, unless we reveal ourselves intentionally. Like you did to me, Marcus said. Yes, you earned the right to see us as we truly are. Finn perched on the bench's armrest, his legs swinging like any normal child. But when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of terrible experience. The Zephyrians found our world when we were barely past hatching. In your terms, we were perhaps 5 years old. Our parents hid us in the deep caves when the invasion ships arrived, but the Zephyrians had technology specifically designed to hunt our kind. Draknari neural patterns are unique, Kale added, touching his temple unconsciously. Our minds work differently than most species. We can sense emotions, share thoughts within our clutch, and instinctively understand the true nature of beings around us. This made us valuable to the Zephyrians as living weapons. Lyra's starlight eyes grew distant. They found us after 3 days. Our parents fought to protect us, but she shook her head, unable to finish. Marcus felt a familiar ache in his chest, the hollow pain of loss that every soldier knew. How many of your people survived? We do not know, Zara admitted. Scattered clutches were taken from different regions. Some may have escaped to the deep spaces between stars, where our kind originally dwelt. But our homeworld, she made a gesture that somehow conveyed infinite sadness. It burned still. The afternoon sun filtered through the oak leaves, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the group. Marcus watched a young mother pushing a stroller past them, her baby laughing at something only children could see, and felt the strange juxtaposition of normalcy and cosmic horror that defined his new reality. The neural control implants, he said quietly. Tell me about those. Finn's hand moved to the back of his neck, where Marcus could now see a faint scar beneath the silvery hair. Imagine your worst nightmare, but you were forced to act it out while fully conscious and aware. We could feel everything, the fear of the human soldiers, their pain when we struck them down, their love for their companions. But we cannot stop. The implants overrode our motor functions while leaving our consciousness intact. It was worse for Lyra, Kale said, glancing protectively at his smallest clutchmate. She's what you might call an empath. She experienced not just her own horror, but absorbed the emotions of everyone around her, human and Draknari alike. Marcus looked at the petite girl with her star-filled eyes and felt his heart break a little. How did you survive it? How did any of you maintain your sanity? We shared the burden, Lyra said simply. Through our clutch bond, we could distribute the emotional trauma among all 4 of us. No one Draknari carried the full weight alone. It is how our species has always survived hardship. But the humans had no such protection, Zara said, her voice heavy with guilt. Every time we were forced to kill, we felt their isolation, their individual deaths. Your kind faces oblivion alone, and that nearly broke us. Marcus understood. He'd seen it in countless battles. The way human soldiers died, calling for their mothers, their lovers, their gods. The terrible solitude of the final moment. He'd never considered how that might affect an empathic species forced to witness it over and over. That's why Crimson Ridge was different, he realized. Yes, Finn nodded. Something had been changing in us over months of forced combat. The neural control was never perfect. It suppressed our natural responses rather than replacing them entirely. Each battle, each death we witnessed, created tiny fractures in the programming. Your moment of recognition was the final catalyst, Zara explained. When you lowered your weapon and looked at us with understanding rather than hatred, it resonated through our clutch bond like a bell. For the first time since our capture, we felt seen as ourselves rather than as weapons. Kale picked up the story. The recognition created what your scientists might call a cascade failure in the neural implants. For approximately 37 seconds, we regained partial control. Long enough to shield some of your soldiers from the orbital bombardment, Lyra added. Though not all. We are sorry. We wish we could have saved more. Marcus felt tears burning his eyes. Johnson was standing right next to me when the plasma struck. If you were shielding me, why didn't— The energy requirements were enormous, Zara said gently. We could only manage small, localized fields. We saved who we could reach in those precious seconds, but the bombardment pattern was too widespread. Your friend. She paused, choosing her words carefully. He died quickly. We made sure of that. It was the only mercy we could offer. They sat in silence for a long moment, watching the normal world go about its business around them. A businessman hurried past checking his phone. Teenagers laughed at some shared joke. An elderly man fed pigeons from paper bag. Life continuing in its endless patterns, unaware that former enemies were making peace beneath an oak tree. What happened after Crimson Ridge? Marcus finally asked. The partial liberation of our minds was enough, Finn explained. We began to resist more actively, finding ways to sabotage operations without triggering the punishment protocols in our implants. We sent coded messages to other Draknari clutches, sharing the technique you had taught us. What technique? Recognition, Lyra said simply. Seeing the consciousness behind enemy action. Understanding that every being, human or otherwise, carries their own burden of pain and choice. When we stopped thinking of human soldiers as targets and started seeing them as individuals with their own stories. She spread her hands. Everything changed. The resistance spread through the Draknari ranks, Kale continued. Slowly at first, but with increasing momentum. We began coordinating our resistance efforts, sharing emotional strength across multiple clutches. The Zephyrians noticed decreased combat effectiveness, but they could never identify the cause. Zara smiled, the first truly happy expression Marcus had seen from any of them. They thought they were dealing with equipment malfunction or battlefield fatigue. They never understood that their living weapons had remembered how to hope. Marcus leaned forward, invested in their story now. How did it end? The war, I mean. The official reports said the Zephyrian Empire collapsed due to internal rebellion, but they never explained what triggered it. Us, Finn said simply. The Draknari rebellion became the spark that ignited resistance movements across dozens of enslaved species. When word spread that even the Empire's most prized weapons had turned against them, other subjugated peoples found courage to rise up. It took 2 more years after Crimson Ridge, Zara explained. But the Zephyrian military structure was built on the assumption of absolute control through fear. When that control began failing in multiple sectors simultaneously, their response became increasingly desperate and ultimately self-destructive. We were not the only species they had enslaved, Lyra added quietly. The Valdari, crystal singers, the Nexan hive minds, the ethereal nomads, all have been pressed into service against their will. When we proved that resistance was possible, that the neural control technology could be overcome, it created a cascade of revolution throughout the Empire. Marcus shook his head in amazement. And it all started with a moment of hesitation in a battle I thought I had failed. You did not hesitate, Kale corrected firmly. You recognized. You saw past the surface of your enemies to the consciousness beneath. That is not weakness. It is the greatest strength your species possesses. The ability to see the person behind the position, Zara agreed. To find common ground, even with those who seem completely alien. It is why the Draknari have chosen to approach humanity as potential allies rather than victims to be avoided. Marcus felt something shifting inside his chest, a loosening of the guilt and self-recrimination that had become his constant companions. You said you were visiting other soldiers from the war. Are they all? Each conversation is different, Lyra said diplomatically. Some humans struggle to accept that their former enemies were as trapped as they were. Some cannot move past the pain we caused, even involuntarily. We understand and do not judge them for it. But others, Finn added with growing excitement, others like you have been willing to listen, to learn, To help us build bridges between our species. What kind of bridges? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew where this was leading. The galaxy is vast, Zara said, her golden eyes reflecting dreams of distant stars. The Zephyrian Empire controlled only a small portion of it. There are ancient threats stirring in the deep void, civilizations that make the Empire look like children playing with toys. Humanity will face challenges in the coming years that will require allies who understand both war and peace. The Draknari have lived in the spaces between stars for eons, Kale explained. We know paths through hyperspace that your navigators have never mapped, worlds rich in resources that could fuel human expansion, and technologies that could revolutionize your understanding of the universe. In return, Lyra said softly, we would learn from humanity's greatest gift, your ability to find hope in the darkest circumstances, to build bonds of loyalty that transcend species barriers, to fight for principles rather than merely survival. Marcus looked at these four beings who had traveled across the galaxy to apologize for actions committed under duress, and felt the last of his self-doubt crumble away. You're talking about an alliance. More than that, Zara said, her voice filled with quiet conviction. We are talking about family. The Draknari concept of clutch bonds is not limited to those hatched from the same nest. It can extend to any beings who choose to share burdens and joys, who pledge to protect one another across all circumstances. You are asking if humanity would be willing to become part of something larger than themselves, Finn clarified. A galactic community built on mutual support rather than conquest. The afternoon was growing late, and Marcus knew he would need to return to his mundane life soon. But something fundamental had changed in the space of a few hours. The war that had defined and nearly destroyed him had become the foundation for something unprecedented, a chance for his species to join something magnificent. What would that mean for people like me? He asked. Broken-down veterans with more scars than sense? It would mean, Lyra said with a smile that lit up her starlight eyes, that your experience fighting against impossible odds, your understanding of loss and sacrifice, and your willingness to see enemies as people would make you exactly the kind of ambassador our new alliance would need. Marcus felt his prosthetic leg against the bench and realized that for the first time since he'd lost the original, he didn't see it as a symbol of failure. Instead, he saw it as proof that sometimes the things that break us can become the foundation for something stronger. 3 weeks passed before Marcus saw the Draknari children again. In that time, he tried to convince himself the encounter had been an elaborate hallucination brought on by stress and medication. But every morning he woke with the memory of golden eyes and star-filled promises, and every night he dreamed of possibilities that stretched across the cosmos. The call came on a Tuesday evening while Marcus was heating a frozen dinner and watching the news. His phone rang with no caller ID, but when he answered, Zara's distinctive harmonic voice filled the line. Marcus Chun, we need your help. No greeting, no pleasantries. Just the kind of direct communication he'd grown accustomed to in the military. What's wrong? We have located another veteran from the Battle of Crimson Ridge. Captain Sarah Martinez, formerly of the 23rd Armored Division. But there are complications. Marcus remembered Martinez, a tough-as-nails officer who'd kept her unit together when everything went to hell. She'd been wounded in the same engagement that cost him his leg, though he'd heard she'd returned to active duty afterward. What kind of complications? She has been recruited by a human organization that views any alien contact as a threat to be eliminated. They call themselves the Terra First Coalition, and they are planning to use Captain Martinez as bait to capture or kill us. The name sent a chill down Marcus's spine. He'd heard whispers about Terra First in veteran circles, a growing extremist group that blamed alien interference for humanity's wartime losses. They viewed any non-human contact as an invasion to be resisted at all costs. How do you know this? Because she contacted us herself, Zara replied, her voice heavy with sadness. She responded to our initial message with coordinates for a meeting. But When we observed the location, we detected electromagnetic signatures consistent with stasis weapons and neural dampening fields. Military-grade equipment. Marcus set down his plastic fork, his appetite gone. Maybe she's being coerced. Perhaps. But our emotional sensing indicates genuine hostility mixed with pain. Deep, unresolved trauma. We believe she blames us for losses she suffered and sees our presence on Earth as a continuation of the war. She's not wrong to be suspicious, Marcus said slowly. 4 alien beings approaching Earth veterans out of nowhere. It does sound like the setup for an invasion, which is why we need a human advocate, Zara continued. Someone Martinez knows and trusts, who can vouch for our intentions. We had hoped you might be willing to speak with her. Marcus laughed bitterly. I'm not exactly the most stable character witness right now. Half the VA thinks I'm suffering from PTSD-induced delusions. But you are her fellow veteran. You shared the same battle, the same losses. If anyone can help her understand the truth about what happened on Crimson Ridge, it would be someone who was there. The weight of responsibility settled on Marcus's shoulders like a familiar burden. He thought about the 4 children who had traveled across the galaxy to apologize for actions committed under duress, and about Captain Martinez, who was apparently so consumed by her own trauma that she was willing to work with extremists. Where is she? The Terra First facility is located outside Sacramento, disguised as a private military contracting company. But, Marcus, you must understand. If you agree to help, you will be placing yourself in significant danger. These humans view any cooperation with non-terrestrial beings as treason. Wouldn't be the first time I've walked into a hostile situation for my fellow soldiers, Marcus replied. When do we leave? There was a pause, filled with what sounded like rapid, whispered conversation. Then, Zara's voice returned, warmer than before. We will collect you tomorrow at dawn. And Marcus? Thank you. Your willingness to trust us continues to restore our faith in the possibility of peace between our species. The next morning, Marcus stood on the roof of his apartment building, watching the sunrise and wondering if he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Right on schedule, the air shimmered above the building's edge, and a craft materialized that defied every law of physics Marcus understood. It wasn't a ship in any conventional sense, more like a living thing shaped from crystalline formations and flowing metal. The hull seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting gently, and patterns of light moved across its surface like neural pathways. A section of the craft opened soundlessly, revealing an interior that looked grown rather than built. Zara appeared in the opening, now wearing what looked like environmental armor made from the same organic materials as the ship. Please come aboard. We have much to discuss during the journey. Marcus stepped into the craft and immediately felt a sense of profound calm wash over him. The interior was warm and softly lit, with surfaces that seemed to adjust their shape to accommodate his human proportions. The other 3 Draknari children were there, also armored, monitoring displays that showed information in scripts he couldn't read. This is a Draknari exploration vessel, Zara explained as the craft lifted off with no sensation of movement. One of the few that escaped the homeworld before its destruction. It has been our refuge and transport for the past several years. It's beautiful, Marcus said honestly, running his hand along a wall that felt like living wood but glowed with inner light. How does it work? Biotechnology, Finn replied without looking up from his displays. The ship is essentially a large, specialized organism that we have formed a symbiotic relationship with. It responds to our neural patterns and adapts itself to our needs. The Zephyrians never understood this aspect of our culture, Kale added. They saw our bioships as primitive compared to their mechanical constructs. It never occurred to them that living vessels could be far more adaptable and resilient than any machine. Lyra gestured to a section of the wall that suddenly became transparent, revealing the landscape rushing by below them at impossible speed. We should reach Sacramento in approximately 47 minutes. During that time, we need to prepare you for what you might encounter. Tell me about Martinez. Marcus said, settling into a chair that molded itself to support his body perfectly. Captain Sarah Martinez, age 31, decorated veteran with exemplary service record. Zara recited from memory. Lost her younger brother, Lieutenant David Martinez, during the Crimson Ridge engagement. He was part of the forward reconnaissance unit that encountered us during the initial skirmish. Marcus's blood went cold. David Martinez. Yeah, I remember him. Kid couldn't have been more than 19. He died in the first wave of fighting before he trailed off, understanding dawning. Before you showed us that humans could recognize our true nature, Lyra finished gently. David Martinez died while we were still fully under neural control, fighting with maximum aggression. His death would have been particularly brutal. Sarah blamed herself for not being able to protect him. Marcus said quietly. She put in for transfer to the front lines after that, became reckless. Command had to pull her back several times. Survivor's guilt combined with unresolved grief, Finn observed. When Tara first approached her with their ideology, it would have provided a focus for her anger and a sense of purpose. Fighting aliens gives meaning to her brother's death. How do we convince someone who's that invested in seeing you as the enemy? We show her the truth, Zara replied simply, just as we did with you. But this time, the revelation must come from a source she trusts, another human veteran who understands her loss. The ship's displays suddenly lit up with warning symbols, and Kale's expression grew tense. We are approaching the facility. Energy readings indicate significant military hardware, definitely a trap. Options? Zara asked. We could abort, Finn suggested. Find another way to contact Captain Martinez. No, Marcus said firmly. She's already committed to this course of action. If we don't show up, Tara first will just convince her that we're cowards as well as invaders. We need to go through with the meeting, but on our terms. Lyra's starlight eyes brightened. You have a plan? The beginnings of one. How good are your ships at electronic warfare? Kale grinned, the first genuinely predatory expression Marcus had seen from any of them. Dragnari biotechnology is particularly effective at disrupting mechanical systems. What did you have in mind? Terra First is expecting 4 alien children to walk into their trap. Instead, they're going to get a masterclass in why humans and Dragnari make better allies than enemies. Marcus outlined his strategy as the ship approached the Terra First facility, a seemingly innocuous complex of buildings surrounded by high fences and surveillance equipment. According to their scans, at least 30 armed personnel were positioned throughout the compound, with Captain Martinez being held in a central briefing room. The key is timing, Marcus explained. I go in first, alone and unarmed, to talk with Martinez. While I'm establishing contact, you 4 create a distraction that demonstrates your capabilities without actually harming anyone. The goal is to show Terra First that they're completely outmatched while proving to Martinez that you're not the monster she thinks you are. And if she refuses to listen? Zara asked. Then, we extract her anyway, Marcus replied grimly. No soldier gets left behind, even when they're working with the wrong side. Sometimes you have to save people from their own poor decisions. The ship settled into a hover pattern above the facility, invisible to the naked eye, but no doubt lighting up every sensor array in the compound. Marcus checked his prosthetic leg one more time, made sure his veteran's ID was visible, and prepared to walk into what might very well be his final mission. Marcus, Lyra called softly as he moved toward the ship's exit. Whatever happens in there, remember that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the recognition that some things are more important than being afraid. He looked back at the 4 beings who had somehow become the most important allies humanity had ever gained, and felt a moment of absolute clarity about what he was fighting for. Not just for redemption from his failures at Crimson Ridge, but for the possibility that 2 species broken by war could find healing in each other. See you on the other side, he said, and stepped into the unknown. Marcus walked through the front gates of the Terra First facility with his hands raised, his veteran's ID clearly visible on his jacket. The guards who met him were professional but tense, military contractors who'd probably seen action in the same war he'd fought. They searched him thoroughly, confiscated his phone and wallet, then escorted him through a series of sterile corridors that reminded him uncomfortably of military detention facilities. Sergeant Chun, Captain Sarah Martinez, stood as he entered the briefing room. She looked older than her 31 years, with short-cropped dark hair and eyes that held the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too much combat. Her left arm hung slightly stiff, shrapnel damage from Crimson Ridge, if Marcus remembered correctly. "Captain," he replied, noting the Terra First personnel positioned around the room. 6 men and women in tactical gear, all armed, all watching him like he might sprout fangs at any moment. "Good to see you again. Is it?" Martinez's voice was cold, professional. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been compromised. Allied yourself with the enemy. The same enemy that saved my life at Crimson Ridge." Her expression hardened. "The same enemy that killed my brother. That slaughtered thousands of human soldiers across 3-star systems. Don't try to sell me some Stockholm Syndrome bullshit about how they were just misunderstood." Marcus took a careful step closer, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. "Sarah, I was there. I saw what happened to David. I know what you're going through." "You know nothing," she snapped. "You lost a leg. I lost family. There's a difference." "You're right," Marcus admitted. "I can't understand that specific pain. But I can tell you that the beings who contacted you aren't the monsters you think they are. They were prisoners of war, forced to fight against their will. Just like David would have been if the Zephyrians had captured him instead of killing him." One of the Terra First operatives, a scarred man with Colonel's insignia, stepped forward. "Enough. We didn't bring you here for therapy. Chun, where are the aliens?" "They'll be here," Marcus replied, checking his watch. "Right about now, actually." The facility's lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness for 3 seconds before emergency lighting kicked in. Alarms began blaring throughout the complex, and the tactical team immediately moved to defensive positions. "Contact," someone shouted over the facility's comm system. "Multiple unknown signatures on all sensors. They're everywhere." Marcus smiled grimly. The Draknari ship's bioelectromagnetic systems could apparently make it appear as dozens of separate contacts to human sensors. From the perspective of Terra First defensive systems, they were under assault by an entire fleet. "What did you do?" Martinez demanded, drawing her sidearm and pointing it at Marcus. "I arranged for a demonstration," he replied calmly. "Your friends here think they're equipped to handle alien contact. They're about to learn otherwise." The briefing room's windows suddenly became transparent, revealing the courtyard outside where something impossible was happening. For figures moved through the compound's defenses like ghosts, but they weren't the small children Marcus knew. These were the Draknari in their true combat forms, still young by their species standards, but large enough to tower over the human guards, their scales gleaming like liquid metal and their eyes blazing with golden fire. But they weren't attacking. Instead, they moved with surgical precision through the facility's defensive positions, disabling weapons and equipment without harming the personnel. Guards found their rifles simply disintegrating in their hands, reduced to harmless dust by some form of molecular disruption. Automated turrets sparked and died as bioelectric fields overloaded their circuits. In less than 2 minutes, the entire facility had been rendered defenseless without a single casualty. "Impossible," the Terra First colonel breathed. "Our intelligence said there were only 4 of them. Children. Dragon children," Marcus corrected. "And they're not here to conquer Earth. They're here to apologize for what they were forced to do during the war." Martinez was staring at the display in shock, her weapon forgotten in her hand. "Those things, they were at Crimson Ridge. I remember now. The way they moved, the coordination. But they were smaller then, more controlled," Marcus finished. "The Zephyrians had them on neural leashes, forcing them to fight against their nature. What you're seeing now is what they're really like when they have a choice." The briefing room door opened, and Zara entered in her combat form. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her scales shifting between blue and silver, her golden eyes reflecting ancient wisdom. The Terra First operatives raised their weapons instinctively, but the weapons crumbled to dust before they could fire. Captain Martinez, Zara's voice carried new harmonics in this form, resonating with power and sadness in equal measure. I am Zara of the Draknari. I was present at the Battle of Crimson Ridge. I was forced to participate in the death of your brother. Martinez stared at the being before her face cycling through emotions, fear, anger, confusion, and something that might have been recognition. Though, I remember your voice in the battle recordings. You made sounds like grief, Zara confirmed, because we could feel his emotions as he died. Your brother was brave, Captain. In his final moments, he was not afraid for himself. He was afraid for you. He called your name. Tears began streaming down Martinez's face. That's impossible. You couldn't have known that. The audio record from his helmet were corrupted. We know because we experienced his death through our empathic abilities, Zara explained gently. Every human soldier who died while fighting us, we felt their final thoughts, their last emotions. It is part of the burden we carry. The Terra First Colonel was speaking rapidly into his radio, calling for backup, for orbital strikes, for anything that might restore their tactical advantage. But Marcus could see in his eyes that he was beginning to understand how completely outmatched they were. Your weapons cannot harm us, Zara continued, addressing the room at large. Your defenses cannot contain us. Your governments cannot threaten us. If we wish humanity ill, your species would already be extinct. We are here because we choose to be, because we believe cooperation serves both our peoples better than conflict. Then why? Martinez asked, her voice breaking. Why didn't you stop fighting sooner? Why did David have to die? Because we were slaves. Finn's voice came from behind them as he entered the room in his own combat form. Because every day we did not resist was another day our own families remained prisoners. Because the neural control made resistance nearly impossible until Marcus showed us that humans could see past their enemies to the people beneath, Kale added, materializing through what Marcus would have sworn was a solid wall. Lyra was the last to enter, her combat form somehow more graceful than the others, her starlight eyes now blazing like miniature suns. We saved what we could at Crimson Ridge once we broke free for those few seconds. Your brother was too far from our position to shield effectively. But we gave him a quick death rather than letting him suffer. It was the only mercy we could offer. Martinez sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the revelation. All this time I thought, I believed you were monsters. That David died fighting some alien horror that enjoyed killing humans. He died fighting children who had been turned into weapons against their will, Marcus said gently. Children who remembered every human life they were forced to take, who carried the emotional weight of those deaths as their own trauma. The Zephyrians never understood that our empathic abilities made us terrible soldiers, Zara explained. They thought our distress was merely programming glitches to be corrected. They never realized that forcing an empathic species to kill was slowly destroying us from within. The Terra First Colonel had gone very quiet, his radio calls growing increasingly desperate as it became clear that no cavalry was coming to save them. The other operatives were looking between their leader and the Draknari with growing uncertainty. What do you want from us? Martinez finally asked, looking up at Zara with red-rimmed eyes. Nothing, Zara replied simply. We came to offer our condolences for your loss, our apologies for our forced participation in it, and our gratitude for your brother's courage in the face of an impossible situation. We also came to offer humanity something more valuable than conquest, partnership. Partnership in what? Survival, Lyra said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in the listener's bones. The galaxy is vast, Captain Martinez. The Zephyrian Empire was merely one threat among many. There are ancient powers stirring in the deep void, civilizations that dwarf human understanding, and cosmic forces that care nothing for the survival of any single species. But together, Kale continued, humanity and the Draknari could face challenges that would destroy either species alone. Your people's adaptability and courage combined with our knowledge and biotechnology could forge something unprecedented, a true alliance of equals. Marcus watched Martinez process this information, seeing the moment when her worldview fundamentally shifted. The anger and grief were still there, but they were being joined by something new, hope, perhaps, or at least the possibility of it. "And if we refuse?" the Terra First Colonel asked, finally finding his voice again. "Then we leave," Zara said simply. "We do not impose our presence where it is not wanted. But we hope you will consider that the alternative to cooperation is not isolation. It is facing the unknown dangers of the galaxy alone." The room fell silent except for the distant sounds of the facility's automated systems trying to restart themselves. Marcus could see the Terra First personnel grappling with the realization that everything they thought they knew about the post-war situation was wrong. "I need time," Martinez said finally, "to think, to process all of this." "Of course," Zara replied. "But perhaps you would consider one request." "What?" "Visit the memorial garden we have created in honor of the humans who died during our force service. See how we remember your brother and his fellow soldiers. Judge for yourself whether we are beings worthy of trust or merely sophisticated predators wearing masks of regret." Martinez looked at Marcus, then back at Zara, her face still streaked with tears but no longer filled with hatred. "Where is this memorial?" "On our ship," Lyra said softly, "which you are welcome to board if you choose. Though I should warn you, once you see how we truly live, how we honor our dead, and tend our bonds with each other, it becomes very difficult to think of us as monsters." The invitation hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus could see Martinez weighing her options, her prejudices warring with her curiosity and her soldier's instinct to gather intelligence. Finally, she holstered her sidearm and stood up straight, every inch the professional officer she'd always been. "Lead the way." The interior of the Draknari ship had transformed since Marcus's first visit. Where before it had been configured for travel and tactical planning, now it opened into something that took his breath away, a living memorial garden that stretched far beyond what the ship's exterior dimensions should have allowed. "Dimensional folding," Finn explained, noticing Marcus's confusion. "The ship's biological systems can manipulate local space-time. What you see here exists partially in normal space and partially in what your physicists would call a pocket dimension." Captain Martinez stepped into the garden behind them, her expression shifting from suspicion to wonder. The space around them resembled a vast greenhouse, but one designed by an alien intelligence. Trees that seemed to be made of living crystal grew alongside flowers that chimed softly in harmonious frequencies. Streams of luminescent water wound through groves of plants that existed in colors human eyes had no names for. But it was the memorial wall that dominated the garden center, a massive structure that appeared to be grown from the same organic materials as the ship itself. Names were inscribed in the living surface, thousands of them, glowing softly with their own inner light. "Every human soldier who died during our force service," Zara explained, her combat form somehow even more impressive in this sacred space. "We remember each one. We carry their names and their stories." Martinez moved toward the wall as if drawn by invisible strings, her eyes scanning the endless list of names until she found what she was looking for. "David Martinez, Lieutenant, 47th Orbital Marines, age 19. She reached out to touch the inscription, and the surface responded to her contact, brightening and beginning to display something that made her gasp. Images formed in the air above the name, scenes from David Martinez's life that no human database could possibly contain. A young boy learning to ride a bike while his older sister cheered him on. A teenager graduating from military academy with Sarah beaming proudly from the audience. A fresh-faced lieutenant saying goodbye to his family before shipping out to war. "How do you have these memories?" Martinez whispered. "From David himself," Lyra replied gently, approaching the wall in her own combat form. "In the moments before death, when the barriers between minds grow thin, empathic beings sometimes receive final thoughts and cherished memories. We preserve them here so that those who loved him can know he died thinking of them. The images shifted, showing David's final moments, but not the brutal combat Martinez had imagined. Instead, she saw her brother's face filled not with fear or pain, but with determination and love. His last thoughts had been a message for her, a promise that he would always be proud to be her little brother, no matter what happened. Martinez broke down completely, falling to her knees before the memorial as 3 years of suppressed grief finally found release. Marcus moved to comfort her, but Zara gestured for him to wait. "Let her mourn," the Draknari leader said softly. "True healing cannot begin until the wound is properly acknowledged." The Terra First Colonel and his team had followed them into the garden, but they seemed diminished here, their weapons and tactical gear looking crude and primitive compared to the living technology surrounding them. Marcus could see them struggling to maintain their hostility in the face of such beauty and reverence for human life. "This is all very touching," the colonel said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. "But sentiment doesn't change the fact that you're an invasion force. For beings today, but how many tomorrow? How long before your entire species arrives to claim Earth for yourselves?" "We are all that remains," Kale replied simply. "Our entire species numbers perhaps 24 individuals scattered across the galaxy. We are refugees, not conquerors." "That's impossible," one of the Terra First operatives protested. The intelligence reports said, "Your intelligence reports were based on Zephyrian propaganda," Finn interrupted. "They wanted their enemies to believe they commanded vast armies of bioweapons. The truth is that the Draknari were nearly extinct even before our world was destroyed. We few who survive do so only because we learned to hide in the spaces between stars." Marcus felt a chill as the implication sank in. "You're telling us that there are only 24 of your people left in the entire universe." "Perhaps fewer now," Lyra admitted sadly. "The war scattered us across different sectors. Some may have been recaptured. Others may have succumbed to their injuries or simply to despair. We do not know." The colonel's hostility was beginning to crack, replaced by something that might have been shame. "If that's true, then Terra First has been preparing to fight a war against refugees. Children, va orphans," Zara corrected gently, "seeking not conquest, but simply a place where we might live in peace and perhaps help others avoid the fate that befell our world." Martinez had regained some composure, though tears still streamed down her face as she studied her brother's memorial. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "To your people, to mine, to all of this?" "That depends on choices yet to be made," Zara replied. "On whether humanity can see past fear to possibility. On whether two species broken by war can find healing in friendship. And if we can't," Marcus asked. Lyra gestured toward another section of the garden, where a different kind of display showed star charts and technical schematics that seemed to shift and evolve as they watched. "We share what we know. Hyperspace routes that could cut travel times between human colonies by decades. Biotechnology that could revolutionize medicine, agriculture, and environmental restoration. Knowledge of ancient civilizations that your archaeologists have only dreamed of discovering." "In exchange for what?" the colonel demanded, still suspicious despite everything he'd witnessed. "Friendship," Finn said simply. "Alliance. The chance to be part of something larger than our individual species. The Draknari have spent millions of years alone in the void, but we were never meant for solitude. We are communal beings who thrive in the company of others. And humanity," Kale added with something that might have been admiration, "has proven to be the most remarkably adaptable and courageous species we have ever encountered. Your ability to find hope in hopeless situations, to fight for principles rather than mere survival, to form bonds that transcend biological boundaries. These are gifts that the galaxy desperately needs." Marcus looked around the memorial garden, taking in the incredible beauty of it, the reverence for human life, the obvious longing for connection that permeated every aspect of Draknari culture. Then he looked at Martinez, still kneeling before her brother's memorial, but no longer weeping. Her face had taken on the expression he remembered from their military days, the look of a soldier who had found a new mission. "Sarah," he said quietly. She stood slowly, turning to face the assembled group with newfound resolve. "My brother died fighting what he thought were monsters. But if there's a chance that his death can lead to something better, something that prevents other families from suffering what mine did." She looked directly at Zara. "What do you need from us?" "Begin small," Zara replied. "Allow us to establish an embassy of sorts on Earth. Let our peoples learn about each other gradually, without pressure or expectation. Prove that cooperation is possible before attempting anything more ambitious." "And if Terra first objects?" the colonel asked, though Marcus could see that the man's entire worldview was crumbling around him. "Then Terra first will find itself increasingly irrelevant," Martinez replied with the authority of someone who had just discovered a new purpose. "Because the choice isn't between humans and aliens anymore. It's between fear and growth, between isolation and partnership, between repeating the mistakes of the past and building something better for the future." The colonel looked around at his team, seeing the same uncertainty and growing acceptance in their eyes. Finally, he set down his weapon, a gesture that seemed to echo through the garden like a bell. "I think," he said slowly, "that Terra first may need to reconsider its mission parameters." 3 months later, Marcus stood in the same VA hospital waiting room where this had all begun, but everything was different now. The appointment slip in his hands read "Psychological Evaluation, Final Assessment," and for the first time in years, he wasn't dreading what the doctors might find. The phantom pain in his missing leg had largely disappeared, not through any medical miracle, but through a simple shift in perspective. The prosthetic was no longer a reminder of failure. It was a symbol of survival, of the price paid for wisdom that now served a greater purpose. Through the window, he could see the construction crews working on the new building that would house Earth's first official interspecies embassy. The Draknari had insisted on growing the structure rather than building it conventionally, and the result was something that looked more like a living work of art than a government facility. His phone buzzed with a message from Martinez. "First batch of joint exploration missions approved. When do you want to leave for the Andromeda survey?" Marcus smiled, remembering the young sergeant who had hesitated in the face of impossible enemies and somehow changed the course of galactic history. That man had been broken, haunted by guilt and phantom pain. This man, the one who carried Draknari friendship like a sacred trust and wore his scars as badges of honor rather than shame, was whole in ways he'd never imagined possible. The future stretched before humanity like an uncharted ocean, full of wonders and challenges that would test every limit of human adaptability and courage. But for the first time since Crimson Ridge, Marcus was eager to see what lay beyond the horizon. After all, he wouldn't be facing the unknown alone. His clutch mates would be with him.